Chapter 9. The Hydra had awakened, and Nylea hadn't sensed it. It had taken Daxos, a mortal, to warn her that Polukranos was crashing through her own forest. Something was desperately wrong with the world when mortals could see what gods could not. Taking the form of a massive star-clad wolf, Nylea loped along the trail of destruction left by the Hydra. His mighty footfalls had crushed trees with every step. His hissing fury sent shockwaves of energy emanating through the lush undergrowth, which turned the vegetation to pulp. If left unchecked, the Hydra could flatten the entire Nezian forest. Nylea loved her forest, every leaf and padded foot in her domain. But she had been restless. Ever since the giant elder trees of the forest had been saplings, she felt the pull of the unknown, the desire to explore, to hunt things that deserved to die. There were hidden spaces and dark corners of this world that her brothers and sisters denied existed. There were monsters whose shadows dwarfed mountains, and there were interminable pits of darkness where Heliod's sun had never touched. It was there Nylea liked to go and test her skills against the ferocious night-clad beasts. But she had stayed away too long and neglected her home. And now the Hydra had risen, and it was headed toward the coast. With his instinctive hatred of humans and their artifice, Meletis would be pulverized under his wrath. And the Pantheon itself was in turmoil, with Heliod and Perforos yet again preparing to fight a battle that couldn't be won. Krufix had warned that all the gods would be drawn back into Nyx if they carried their feud too far. Nylea sensed the strange new wound on the face of her forest. She arrived at a blackened circle singed into the earth itself. This damage was not caused by the Hydra, but it was in a place where the Hydra had passed. Nylea became like a vole to scurry upon the earth and decipher the clumps of dirt and blood-stained sand. She took the shape of a falcon and soared above the glade, noting each step and drag of a hoof or foot. A group of satyrs and humans had held a revel around a bonfire, but why so far from the Skola Valley, Nylea didn't know. At first, when it was wine and joyous laughter, the celebrants had gathered around the fire and danced. But later, when it had become bloody and violent, the prince staggered in all directions. The bonfire had exploded in a great burst of energy. There were blackened footprints of revelers caught in its blast zone, but there were no bodies. In the vicinity of the pit fire, the bare earth had become like black sand. There were no green leaves on the nearby trees. Instead, the bare branches had transformed into jagged obsidian. Some unnatural casting was at work here. Nylea again took the shape of a wolf and continued following the path of the Hydra's destructive journey to Meletis. When Nylea reached the top of the ridge, she could see Polukranos at the far end of the valley, and she felt pity for the magnificent creature. He was acting in the only way he knew how. She had tried to keep him safe in Nyx, but Perforos and his wretched sword had ruined his peaceful place among the stars, and now something had disturbed his rest again through no fault of his own. The suffering of animals incensed Nylea and made her feel murderous. She would find the culprit and make him see the pain suffered by the creatures she loved. But the Hydra was nearing the guardians of Meletis, the massive statues that guarded the roads leading into the polis. If he reached them, he would be beyond the boundaries of the Nezian forest. Nylea discarded her corporeity and infused her essence into the roots that twined under the forest floor. Through the roots, she reached across the expanse between herself and the Hydra. She tried to gather a sense of Polukranos, to touch the pathways of his mind, and call him home to the forest where he might be safe. But her domain had become so small. She couldn't find him. She couldn't sense a creature that towered above the mortals' monuments to the gods. Something had cut him off from her. Something had cut him off from the forest itself. Nylea left the roots and came back into herself. This time, she took her favored form as a dryad. There was grief in her heart for her damaged forest and for the plight of the majestic Hydra. She could not contain this problem to her forest. As much as it grieved her to admit it, she needed Heliod's help. The Shrine of the Gods was a nexus point between Nyx and the mortal world, but only the Nyx-born could use it to move between the two realms. The gods needed no portal and could shift freely between the realms as they liked. The mortals called this temple Nykthos, but the name was much older than any living human. When they used the name, the mortals didn't know they referred to a divine artisan. Nykthos was the first Nyx-born created by Crufix, who was tasked with building the altars to the gods. Nylea remembered him vaguely, like a child remembering a long-dead grandfather. Built on a vast plain high in the mountains, the temple itself was a huge semicircle on a field of marble. There was an unobstructed view of the horizons in all directions. While mortals believed the site to be a natural feature of the world, it was Nykthos who fashioned the landscape with his bare hands in honor of the gods. Statues of gods, champions, and oracles littered the shrine. There was even one of Nylea. She didn't like images of herself crafted in stone, but she'd had nothing to say in the construction of this marvel. Each god had a marble altar in a distinct alcove, and once the gods had gone to war over whose alcove was the largest. Nylea moved silently past Thesa's altar, which was a fountain that flowed with starry water. A statue of the Triton hero Thrasios looked down into a pool that reflected the brilliance of Nyx. The statues and alcoves were crumbling in places, touched by the ravages of time. Even Heliod's were damaged. Nylea took the form of a mortal woman and paused before the massive urn set on the altar. A pillar of light originated within the urn and towered into the sky. The mortals said it touched Nyx itself. What mortals didn't know was that Nykthos was a mirror image to another temple in the foyer to Nyx itself, where it marked the entrance to the realm of the gods. There was another urn in Nyx, and the pillar of light connected the two, although there were no straight lines traveling between realms, or even to the ends of the world. "Heliod," Nylea called, "you are needed." She wanted Heliod to come and walk with her on the land, but he did not. He spoke with her, but not grace her with his presence. She wondered what was so important that he could not spare her his precious time. "You are truly my most beautiful sister," he said. He said it even though he knew that flattery meant nothing to the god of the hunt, who ignored his compliment. "I have stood many times near where the Hydra slumbered, feeling his heartbeat through the blades of grass. I can sense the caterpillars in their cocoons, the shiver of the fawn in the shadows, the thud of the rabbit's feet on earth. How is it that I can't commune with one of my own children?" "My vision is narrowing as well," Heliod said. "For Theros not only threatens the god realm, he has figured out a way to limit our sight. He narrows each of our domains." "What weapon can accomplish this?" Nylea asked. "Another sword?" "The riddle is not yet solved," Heliod told her. "Daxos spoke of voids in his god sight. This troubles our mortals as well as ourselves," Nylea said. "No god may touch another's vessel," Heliod said. If Perforos has afflicted Daxos, then he has scorned the laws of existence.
Remember Krufix's warning, Nylia said. If your feud threatens mortal existence, then he will enforce a silence and remove us all to Nyx.
Perforos must be punished, Heliod said.
Before you blame Perforos, Nylia said, have you searched for another cause? I have seen something strange in the Nezian forest. A satyr staged a fiery ritual. He drives the Hydra toward Meletis.
The satyrs are under your protection.
Skola Valley is under my protection. Not a singular satyr who taunts my creatures.
Send your spies through your own timbers, little one, Heliod said. The Nezian is as restless as Thesos pond.
What has awakened the Hydra? Nylia asked. When last I was near the chamber, he slept soundly.
How many years ago was that? Heliod asked. You have been away in the unknown lands for longer than you might perceive.
Years, Nylia laughed. Have you become so like the humans that you measure time in their increments?
And are you so love-stricken with Daxos that you are not watching your own children?
I have no interest in your petty squabbles with Perforos until my creatures become toys in your duels.
If Perforos destroys Nyx, then your forest will not survive. Neither will Seteza or your beloved animals. Perhaps you should care a little more, Heliod warned her.
You don't know that, Nylia protested, but she felt fear that any threat might harm the forest dwellers.
Heliod scoffed. You know the natural order better than anyone. Mortal and ideal cannot coexist peacefully. And as I have said, the realms are becoming like shifting sand.
The Hydra will stay in my forest, Nylia said decidedly. I will see to it.
What will you do? Heliod asked.
I will visit the satyr, Nylia said. I tracked his footprints. He went from the Skola to incite the Hydra. And after he left the Hydra, he called upon Perforos.
Heliod exploded in anger. You tell me to search for another cause, and then you reveal that the satyr works for the god of the forge? This time, I won't let Krufix punish Perforos so gently. I will imprison him myself in the boiling tar near Erebos' throne.
Nylia had enough of talking to Heliod. She became a falcon soaring away from him.
If the Hydra reaches the Guardians, he is no longer under your protection, Heliod called, his voice like the wind during a fierce storm. My champion cannot allow him to demolish the city.
Don't touch my Hydra, Nylia warned the wind, but Heliod did not care to listen. Nylia approached the Skola Valley with fury in her heart. The upstart Xenagos, with his pretensions of greatness, was behind this. She knew it as soon as she saw the tracks of his revel. He was the only creature she ever encountered who did not seem to appreciate the gulf in their existence. He acted as if he didn't care that he was merely a creature of the world, and she was a divinity of the stars. But worse, she had protected him, like everything that lived in her realm. She tolerated the satyrs and their mischief. She let them have autonomy in their pristine little valley, where they did nothing but drink themselves into oblivion. Nylia wanted to strangle Xenagos with her bare, human hands, but when she moved to walk under the gateway of trees into the Skola, a wall-like spell blocked her passage. The mystical protections were far more powerful than should be expected of a minuscule goatman. Nylia became monstrous, her skin like bark, and her arms like trunks of massive trees. She grew to 50 feet tall, with all the lifeblood of the forest seething through her veins. Her skin was emblazoned with Nyx as she lorded over the valley. Beneath her, the satyrs ran in terror at the sight of her, tripping over their tiny hooves and shrieking like cowards. With a single strike, Nylea ripped the mystical shield off the valley, which now looked like a tiny furrow in the ground below her. The grassy earth trembled and tore open, revealing caverns and the black smoke of industry. Through the rift in the earth, she could see caverns that Xenagos had transformed into forges in the image of Perforos's own mountain. There were prisoners chained to the ground, and they too froze in terror, their hammers suspended, and they stared at the sky and the tremendous arrival of Nylea. The cry of a bird reached Nylea's ears. It was the pitiful wailing of a chimera, imprisoned and panicked. Nylea sent ribbons of vine to seek the source, shatter the bars, and set all the creatures free. It was done in seconds. While the prisoners fled, an injured chimera limped into the sky. Its wing was twisted, but still it managed to fly. It was fashioned from divine bronze, and Nylea recognized it as one of Perforos's creatures. She abhorred the metal trappings of the creature, but couldn't fault him for his beautiful inventiveness. Part ibis and part stag, the chimera sang praises to Nylea and flew toward Mount Veles. Nylea entered the valley and landed on the ground with a small rumble. She was human-sized again, but still towered over the cowering satyrs. Unconscious bodies lay scattered around, the victims of her anger. "I liked my chimera," Xenagos said. He stepped from behind a wooden platform that held a gilded throne. As soon as the pointy-chinned satyr stepped into the open, Nylea whipped the bow from her back and pointed an arrow between his eyes. "Xenagos! What madness is this?" Nylea shouted. "Fix my floor, sister," he said, pointing at the hole in the ground that revealed his forge. "You little pig," she said. "I am not your sister. And what have you done to my Hydra? And why do you presume that he is yours? What gives you the right of ownership?" Nylea made a minuscule adjustment and unleashed her arrow. Instead of piercing him between the eyes, she punctured his chest. By design, the arrow narrowly missed his heart. He was blasted backward by the force of the impact, but Nylea moved faster than he stumbled. Before the arrow finished traveling into his chest, she grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the ground. With a knee pressed into his chest, she leaned over him. She grabbed the shaft of the arrow and twisted it. He screamed in pain as the arrowhead tore through his flesh and inched closer to his heart. "I am your god, and you are nothing but a bleating kid," she hissed. "Should I pull your eyes out and feed them to the rats?" "Please, no," he gasped. He tried to speak again, and Nylea leaned forward to hear his plea. "No, not the rats," he said sarcastically, spitting blood between his clenched teeth. She stood up and left him sprawled on the ground. She sent a ripple of energy through the ground that jolted him back against the stone wall behind the throne. His bones cracked, but Xenagos grinned venomously. The rectangular slits of his pupils grew larger as he reached up and grabbed the shaft of Nylea's arrow that was still sticking out of his chest. "Why do you mock me?" Nylea asked. "Would you like to see my wrath rain down from Nyx?" "What do you want, O honored visitor?" Xenagos asked. "Why do you torment Polukranos?" she asked. "Did you awaken him?" "No, something new entered the world," Xenagos said, "and it draws him like a moth to a candle. I just helped him on his way. By inciting him, you are risking the lives of all my creatures. You risk the safety of the mortal realm." Xenagos snapped the wooden shaft, leaving the arrowhead deep in his chest. He flung the useless wood ineffectually at the god of the hunt. It landed in the grass near his hooves. Nylea sensed his sick pleasure, how he reveled both in the pain and at her presence in his valley. I care nothing for your creatures. Soon, you and all your precious children will bow before me. Nylea could not be bothered to strike him again. Instead, she revoked her protection of the Skola Valley. In that instant, the trees faded from existence, the grassy expanse turned brown, and the plants withered. The stone walls, the wooden platform, and the pretentious gilded throne all turned to dust. Nylea diverted the bubbling stream with a wall of vines. She called away all creatures that dwelt there, and offered them new homes in her forest. Even the earthworms of the soil fled from the sickly ground. The king of all. By the time Xenagos finished his sentence, he was standing in a wasteland. Now she saw something in his eyes. Not fear exactly, and certainly hatred, but something more sinister. Now you are king of nothing, she said softly. If you don't cease your mischief now, I will throw you across Erebos' river myself. Ah, that's the thing, isn't it? He replied, defiant. Blood oozed from the arrow wound in his chest. You can't kill me. Nylea felt something strange flicker inside of her. What did you say? You can't touch me? Nylea felt something strange flicker inside of her. What did you say? You can't touch me, Xenagos said. I just did, and your wounds should make you remember. You didn't touch me. You touched the world. Your bones are broken just the same, she replied. Gods can't touch mortals, Xenagos said. You can't kill us any more than you can kill each other. You're a fool if you believe that. Nylea found herself puzzled by his arrogance and his denial of the physical forces that had just battered him. Belief. Funny you should use that word, Queen, Xenagos said. You are nothing anymore. You are lower than the returned. I was going to invite you to stay with me, but now I won't. The revels are just beginning. Nylea departed, no longer interested in meaningless banter with this ostracized creature. She became the air born from a sunflower's petals. As she eased into the air, the fear for her beloved Hydra and the Crufix's threat consumed her. Because of the voids that his revels had created in her godsight, she could not sense Xenagos begin to restore his valley, rebuild his throne, or repair the protective magic of his peculiar sky. Later, as she raced with her lynx across the fields of wheat toward the Guardians, she couldn't feel the massive waves of mana rolling out of his forge, cloaked by powerful spells he had again woven around his ruined valley. But despite his secrecy, his frenetic rituals shaved more stars from the underpinnings of the world. The cracks in the realms grew wider, and the dust of the cosmos jumbled together and rained through the rifts like sand.